This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This podcast contains adult themes and language, and some of the things that we discuss may be disturbing to some listeners. In this podcast, we discuss sexual assault, torture, race, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself.
Now we're going to get into the early life of Reginald Vernon Oates. So he was born in May of 1949. His parents divorced, and he grew up with his mother and stepfather, Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Alford, in the Rognall Heights neighborhood of Edmondson Village.
And Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Alford is all I could find.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I hate how it's always Mrs.
Oh, you
so
couldn't
and
set
so.
her
Like,
name.
I don't know her name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. Okay, got it.
Yeah. The Alfords were described as soft-spoken, cultured, and respectable neighbors. The family lived on Wicklow Road right off of Gwynn Falls/Leakin Park, southwest of Stokes Drive. There is an elementary school on that street, so I went on Google Maps and I looked at it because I tend to do that just so I can get...
And we're grateful that you do.
I just like to know what the area is really like, and I saw an elementary school, and I know this guy preyed on children, so I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Then I found out that it was actually built in 1970, 2 years after these crimes were committed, so it wasn't there when he lived there.
Okay.
If anybody wanted to know, which they didn't, but there you go anyway.
That's great news because I thought... a school when you said it. Yeah.
That's what I thought when I saw it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Reginald, whose nicknames were Junior and Reggie, was brought up very protected. The family attended a Pentecostal church, and Reggie was described as a, quote, real choir boy type, unquote.
Reggie's summers were spent in North Carolina with his grandmother, who he was very close to. So when she passed away, he was deeply affected. And on the night before her funeral, he ran away and took a bus back to Baltimore. He just couldn't handle the funeral.
Oh, wow. So, did somebody comfort him or help him with the stages of grief at that point? But Reggie was an above-average student who was interested in school. In 1965, when Reggie was 16, he was excited to start high school. However, the school had recently been integrated, and there was a lot of prejudice and tension.
And a white boy accused Reggie of threatening him with a baseball bat and stealing 30 cents from him, which amounts to about $3 in today's money. So
not much.
Very little money.
Yeah.
According to his mother, Reggie was always provided with ample money. So there would have been no reason for him to steal from another student.
But that's kind of sometimes all it takes is a white person accusing a black person. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be true at all.
Nope.
The principal of the school, who was also white, referred the matter to the police. What?
Yeah.
And Reggie was charged with armed robbery.
Armed robbery.
At 16.
Yeah.
And his mother and stepfather, believing that the school should have settled the matter without involving the police, sought the aid of the NAACP. That's good. That's a good move.
Yeah, but even so, Reggie was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years in prison.
Mm.
And his mother and stepfather believed that had it not been for their efforts in getting the NAACP involved, he probably would have received an even longer term for $3.
$3.
$3.
That we don't even know was really stolen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it probably wasn't stolen.
Yeah. So Reggie served some time at the penitentiary and then was moved to a reformatory in Hagerstown. There, he was attacked by several men. These were not boys, and he was beaten and raped there.
According to his mother, Reggie had very little knowledge of sex and did not know that such human beings existed. He suffered irreparable mental and physical harm. His mother and stepfather requested medical treatment and that something be done about what happened. And guess what? Nothing was done.
They got him the best medical care? No, I was going to say, this was interesting to me given the time. This is the 60s. And now in the Black community, Black people are not a monolith, but mental health is something that's talked about more regularly and openly. And in the 60s,
not at all.
There was no time for feelings. No. We're trying to overcome.
Survive. Yeah.
So I just think that that's really remarkable of them to be like, we need a little extra help here, mental health treatment. And we deserve it. Our son deserves it. And advocating for him.
I get the feeling that they were pretty, well off and intelligent and worldly. That's the feeling I get.
I agree. And think about the reasons for that, right? Is that Baltimore and Maryland was a place where Black people have had citizenship and freedom longer than they have in other parts of the world.
Right.
So those advantages of education, better paying jobs, being in the middle class are more likely to be people in Maryland who have that than maybe other people in this time period.
Right. Yeah.
Racism. So after Reggie was released from prison, his mother and stepfather did whatever they could to help him overcome the effects of the ordeal. But he withdrew and became increasingly depressed, morbid, and fearful. He was ashamed, disillusioned, and confused.
I'm an American vigilante. I have a question for you. What would you do if someone you cared about was abducted, taken from you? Would you call me? Would you care about how I got them back? Download American Vigilante now.
So when the scammer uses the hypnotic method of building rapport, then they create dysfunctional, delusional reality.
That's how a scam begins, convincing the mark that it makes perfect sense to hand over their money to a con artist. The Scams and Cons podcast tells you how scams are run. You'll hear how people are convinced to buy fake art, buy machines that print money, or steal your house.
I get a phone call from my wife, and she let me know that they had decided to move all our stuff out. I could no longer do anything about it except go through an eviction.
And you'll hear it from the experts, people who run the cons.
So we go to your bank, you go in and get $6,000 cash, give us each $3,000, we give you this. You go home and what you find out is cut up newspaper.
It's fun to know how the trick is done, and that's what Scams and Cons is all about. Listen at scamsandcons.com or wherever fine podcasts are found.
Reggie was too ashamed to go back to school and believed that the armed forces would not have him. So he found a job as a janitor. And this was a smart kid in school. He was doing really well. And so now he's...
One accusation fucked it all up.
Right. Yeah. Soon afterwards, as he was returning home from work, he found a gun in the park. He was arrested in possession of the gun and sent back to prison for parole violation.
And we've talked about the history of the crookedness of the Baltimore Police Department as
knows?
well.
He probably didn't even have a gun.
That's what I'm saying. So after he was released from prison again, he isolated himself and spent a lot of time in the basement of the family home in a work-study area. He apparently spent much of his time reading the Bible. So now we're going to get into the timeline. Hit it, Beth.
In April of 1968, Oates was 18 years old. He was described in news articles at the time as a, quote, young unemployed janitor and a bright-eyed teenager who looked like a Sunday school boy, unquote.
On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. This triggered unrest in over 100 cities across the United States. These events were sometimes called the Holy Week Uprising.
Baltimore remained peaceful through April 6th, when about 300 people gathered peacefully around noon for a memorial service, which lasted until 2 p.m. without incident. But a crowd began to form in East Baltimore, and by 5 p.m., some windows had been smashed and police began to move in.
Fires began being reported after 6 p.m. Soon after, the city declared a 10 p.m. curfew, and Spiro Agnew, the governor of Maryland, called in 6,000 troops from the National Guard and 500 Maryland State police officers.
Of note, Agnew vehemently opposed marches and demonstrations. He had a reputation for colorful language, including racist remarks, and ran on a tough-on-crime, law and order platform.
In 1953, his reaction to the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Alabama, in which 4 little black girls, died, he refused to attend a memorial service at a Baltimore church. Great.
Yeah.
And he also denounced a planned demonstration in support of the victims. So
that's
those
disgusting.
Are some of his greatest hits, I guess.
Yeah.
He's a doo-doo head.
Yeah. Agnew became vice president to Nixon, another great guy, in 1969. As vice president, he continued speaking without a filter, often making off-the-cuff racist remarks, and he frequently attacked opponents of the administration, opponents of the Vietnam War, liberals in general, and the press as being disloyal and un-American. Sounds familiar.
Very much so. Very much so. Golly. History, can you please stop rhyming? So Nixon was reelected in 1972, but the next year, Agnew was forced to resign as vice president after the U.S. Justice Department, remember them, uncovered widespread evidence of his political corruption, and he was charged with tax evasion, which is a felony, but who cares?
Who cares? Yeah.
Law and order for everyone but himself, I guess. And that also sounds so fucking familiar.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Gross.
I've had enough of this.
Anyway, let's get back to the story.
Okay.
On Sunday, April 7th, 1968, 5 deaths, 300 fires, and 404 arrests were reported in Baltimore. At one point, white counter-rioters assembled near Patterson Park, but they dispersed after National Guard troops prevented them from entering a black neighborhood. So they were just going to go into this black neighborhood and just like tear it apart.
Wreak havoc, terrorize them.
Yeah.
I don't always hear about the National Guard doing great things in events and situations like this.
But this one was pretty good.
Okay. So on April 11th, Agnew called together the black community for a, quote, frank and far-reaching discussion, unquote, at a conference room in downtown Baltimore. But it wasn't a discussion. It was a trap. The governor tore into the crowd for standing by while rioters ransacked stores and set cars on fire. Are you fucking kidding me?
He lectured them, saying that they claimed to speak for racial harmony, but when the violence began, they ran. And within minutes, most of the audience members had stormed out. But at the door, they found reporters, which Agnew had tipped off.
What a fucking snake!
Asshole, yeah.
Within hours, Agnew's confrontation was national news. Within days, this obscure first-time governor was being assailed as a racist by the left and hailed as a rising star in the Republican Party. That's not good. It was that summer that Richard Nixon picked him as his running mate. Wow.
Gross. Back in Baltimore in April of 1968, unrest continued for several days. Then early on April 12th, federal troops began to depart, and by 6 p.m. that evening, responsibility for riot control returned to the National Guard. On April 14th, which happened to be Easter, Maryland National Guard troops were sent home, and Agnew declared the emergency over.
Almost 11,000 troops had been deployed. 6 people died, 700 people were injured, and 5,800 people were arrested.
Holy shit.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. And
that is a lot. Where did they put them all?
Paddy wagons. Isn't that how Freddie Gray in Baltimore was killed?
That's right.
And they would load a bunch of mostly black people into the back of these paddy wagons and take them for rough rides.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of bodies to arrest.
Yeah.
But the uprising had broken out mainly in the black neighborhoods of East and West Baltimore, in which extensive property damage and looting occurred.
During this same time in Northwest Baltimore, there had been numerous reports of missing children. And in the neighborhood on Stokes Drive, which runs along Gwynn Falls / Leakin Park on the southeastern side, several children had returned home with reports that they had been accosted by a man who had made sexual advances to them.
3 boys had been attacked and hospitalized. Dennis Hodge, 7, Benjamin Avery, no age was given, and Clinton Harris was 7 years old. On April 10th, a man had attempted to rape 2 girls.
For the Easter weekend, Easter was on April 14th, the Oates family drove to North Carolina to visit relatives and then returned home. Then on April 17th, Oates lured 10-year-old Lewis Hill into Gwynns Falls / Leakin Park by telling him there would be a game of cowboys and Indians.
There, Oates beat and raped the boy, then murdered him with a knife and a hatchet. He then slit Lewis's throat and violated his corpse, slicing off his head and his hands.
Yikes.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, using the same tactic, Oates lured 3 boys into the park. 8-year-old Larry Jefferson, his 5-year-old brother Mac, and their 10-year-old nephew Lester Watson. All 3 boys' families were from Littleton, North Carolina.
Lester spent the night at the Jeffersons' house, and shortly after breakfast, all 3 boys went out back to play. Sometime after 10 a.m., they went missing.
Oates beat and stabbed all 3 boys numerous times. Like with Lewis, he had sex with the children's bodies. He then gutted them and cut off their genitals, which he took with him. Yeah.
I don't have any words.
Yeah.
On April 19th, Oates lured 2 underage girls into the park and unsuccessfully attempted to attack them. They reported the attack to police, who went looking for the man who attacked them. So now we're going to get into the investigation and the arrest. What do you got for us, Beth?
Shortly before noon, police approached Oates in the woods off of Stokes Drive, and he broke into a run. Once caught, the police found in his possession 2 brown paper bags, a small blue suitcase, and a gray lunchbox.
I don't want to know what's in the box.
Yeah.
1 bag contained the genitals of 3 young boys. The lunchbox contained a pair of blue socks, a hacksaw blade, a table knife, and a piece of metal about 8 inches long, one end of which turned under to form a claw.
Yikes.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like a velociraptor claw.
Yeah.
It's also been reported that there was a hand in one of the bags.
Jeez.
Mm.
Oates took police to the location of the bodies. Larry and Mac Jefferson and Lester Watson were lying neatly arranged in a row, their throats cut.
Mm.
The body of Lewis Hill was lying nearby. He had been decapitated, and his head was located a short distance from the body.
Lewis's heart and liver had been removed, and body parts were strewn about. One veteran police officer said it was the most gruesome sight he had ever seen in all of his 20 years in law enforcement.
Yeah, I can only imagine, although I don't want to.
Yeah.
One investigator described Oates as completely emotionless as he took the officers to the bodies and was questioned.
Is the pressure of your wedding day being perfect from sunrise to sunset weighing on your mind? Planning a wedding is stressful, but guess what? We are here to help. On the Bride Sheila podcast, we celebrate love and help you plan your wedding day. We're all about keeping it real and having fun every step of the way. So whether you're just starting to plan or counting down the days, we're here to help you stay cool, calm, and collected. We have expert tips and amazing guests like wedding dress designer Haley Page. Let's get this party started and embrace your inner Bridechilla. Listen to Bridechilla wherever you get podcasts or visit us at thebridechilla.com.
Along with being charged with the 4 murders, Oates was charged with committing quote-unquote perverted practices on 5 other children, 2 of them girls, and attempting to murder and molesting 4 boys, 3 age 7 and 1 age 10. He took $1 from a 10-year-old boy, so he was charged with robbery as well. There were 16 charges in all.
A psychiatrist was asked who could have committed such crimes, to which he replied, quote, a psychotic sexual deviant, unquote.
Well, let's get into the trial. So Oates pleaded innocent by reason of insanity to the 16 charges, including 4 murders, rapes, 2 assaults with intent of rape, and 1 armed robbery. In November of 1968, after 8 physicians found him to be mentally incompetent, he was committed to the Department of Mental Hygiene for psychological testing for an indefinite period. And that is it for the story.
Yeah.
Let's get into where are they now? Tell us, Beth.
Well, according to an article written in 2014, at that time, Oates was still in the mental institution and continued to petition the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for release. I've not been able to find out if he is still there or even if he's still alive. And that was the only article I found that was more modern that said anything about where he is now. So I don't know.
Okay.
But I doubt that he ever got out.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but...
Yeah, I think it would be hard for the leadership in any jurisdiction to see sort of what
him
he
released.
did. Yeah. And feel okay with him being released.
And then also, I think we would hear about it. I think it would be reported on.
I agree. But any Baltimore or DMV Fruities out there, if you have any more details on this case, you know where to find us, and we're happy to hear from you.
Yeah.
So let's get into our takeaways. What do you think about this case, Beth?
Well, he seemed to be doing fine, even really well, actually, because he was doing well in school, and he seemed fine until he was arrested for supposedly stealing from a schoolmate and put in jail with men who raped and beat him. I don't know if he had a predilection for mental health issues.
Oh, predilection. I like that word.
But the catalyst, I think, seems to be how he was treated in prison. That seemed to have just broken him.
Yeah.
And I would have to say that a big factor in this story is racism.
Yeah.
Because I don't think this would have happened to a white boy. I think this would have stayed in the school.
Yeah.
I don't know if a white boy would have been accused of something that they didn't do.
Right. In the mid 60s.
Yeah. And, I don't think any
been turned
of
over
this
to
would
law
have
enforcement.
happened.
Right.
If Oates had been white.
Yeah. I can tell you it rarely happens. I mean,
yeah.
Think of the violence that we see in schools mostly today since Columbine, and who's the one doing them, right?
Yeah.
Those kids don't experience the same discipline for similar issues that Black kids do. And that's a fact.
Yeah, I think that was definitely what happened to this guy, and it fucked him up, and he went crazy, I guess.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, gosh, in my mind, it's almost like he was pushed to the edge. I'm not excusing what he did to these kids. But as far as what made him snap, it was everything. It was the segregation and the prejudice. He was alive when Brown v. Board of Education came into pass, and I'm sure he experienced as a little kid in school the tension that young people were forcing to go through. Meanwhile, the adults in the room, the teachers, the legislators, nobody else had to desegregate, only the students. And
some of the white teachers and stuff were not for it. So.
Right. So you're just putting these kids in a really dangerous environment. And that's what I think, I agree, happened to Reginald when he was a kid, and he got accused of something that he probably didn't even do. But the consequences were so dire for him. And then almost like he had no chance after that.
Yeah.
Then he parole violation after parole violation. He doesn't get the opportunity to get the rehabilitation that he needs.
They just didn't have it then either.
Yeah.
The time period, the 60s, the 70s. I don't know that they had anything that would have helped him. I don't know.
I guess we can never know for sure. But, it made me think of, how white folks are making a lot of effort to prevent the teaching of American history because it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But imagine, Reginald is one of those kids that we talk about in the small paragraph in the history books who was actually experiencing those horrible things.
Yeah.
And what that would have been like for the people in the stories. And I think our environment goes beyond what happens in our homes. It's also how you're treated in the world. So if in the store, when you go to the doctor's office or at a restaurant or at school or at work, if you're treated like shit and reminded of it constantly, and it's just because of the color of your skin, that will fuck you up. It's isolating. It fucks up your self-esteem and can lead to self-hate or internalized racism. And his first crime was committed. It wasn't really a crime. He was accused. And I don't think he would have gotten the same consequences. I also don't think he would have been institutionalized immediately. Like if it was a white boy and maybe it did go to the level of being the police needed to get involved.
A trial and all that.
They probably would have just given him a stern talking to, but he ended up in an adult facility.
Yeah.
And all those things.
Even if he did steal 30 cents.
In what world would
none of that
prison?
Yeah, none of that was 2 years in prison. That's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. And all those things I think increase his stress, anxiety, depression, and trauma, mental health, and Black people is not something that's studied. I was listening to an interview with a therapist today. He said every textbook he had when he was getting his master's degree to be a therapist, everybody was white in the textbooks. It's like they don't even study the mental health of Black people and what this collective trauma can do to somebody.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like they just didn't have anything for people like Oates at that time.
Yeah. And all that to say that that's what I think contributed to his state at the time that he committed these murders. I also feel like maybe he was somebody who had nothing to lose. And maybe this is a stretch. But what if Reginald, because of his experiences of segregation and being wrongfully accused just because he was Black, and being institutionalized just because he was Black, seeing happy, unbothered, safe children that was something that he didn't get, if maybe he was angry by seeing that and wanted to punish them or eliminate the thing, how some serial killers hate women, so they just target women.
Right.
All that to say, I just think he was really fucked up by prior circumstances.
Angry.
Yeah. And it put everybody in danger.
Yeah.
Right? When one of us is not safe, none of us are safe.
Yeah.
And hurt other people.
Right. Yeah. I think you're onto something with that. Hating the idea of seeing happy children. Also, he may have seen those children as an extension of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably hated himself at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And this case is just really, really sad. I want to remember this is not just the Reginald Vernon Oates case, that there are 4 children who lost their lives. Their names are Lewis Hill, Larry Jefferson, Mac Jefferson, and Lester Watson.
Yeah.
And can't forget them and what those who love them lost as well. Beth, where can the people find us?
Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we use Fruit Loops Pod for all of our social media.
This is a weekly podcast, and new episodes drop every Thursday. So until next time, look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there.
On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
You're listening to Stop the Killing podcast. Join us as we take you behind the crime scene tape to explain global mass shootings and mass attacks. I'm Sarah Ferris, but more importantly, this is Catherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
I spent 5 years as the FBI's top executive looking for answers to the mass shooting crisis. I've been at the shooting scenes, I've traced heroic acts of bravery, and I've sat silently and listened to the heart-wrenching stories from survivors.
Amongst this horror, there is hope. We all hold the key to stop the killing. You just need to know how to unlock the door. Download Stop the Killing and be part of the solution. Search Stop the Killing on Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects.
The truth about the Haditha massacre has been covered up, but not anymore.
I know you know what happened.
They went into houses and killed women and children.
What are you thinking?
What a mess.
U.S. Marines murdered innocent civilians in cold blood.
And at the center of it all
is 25-year-old Sergeant Frank Wuterick.
And me. Murder in House 2. A new podcast from Crowd Network.